And good afternoon, Tiger listeners. Thanks for tuning in. If you didn't hear Jordan's promo, we have a very special guest in the Tiger studio right now. U.S. Senate candidate Jim Gray, the current mayor of Lexington, has joined us, and we're so happy to have you today, Mr. Gray. How are you?
Cody, great to be here. I said Cody there. Sorry about that, buddy.
It happens. It's completely fine.
I bet. Yeah, it's great to be with y'all. Yeah, it's really good to be in Princeton.
Well, we'll jump right in. You are the mayor of Lexington, so tell us a little bit about yourself and your history. Acquaint yourself with our listeners.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for that opportunity. I actually grew up in Glasgow and in south central Kentucky, not too far from the Tennessee border. At about a 3-hour drive from Princeton. But I grew up there, spent half my life in Glasgow. Grew up in a family business, a small family business. My dad passed away when I was 19, and I came home from college then to help save the business. We actually worked real hard, but 7 years later we were on our backs, flat broke, and but we recovered with the help of family and friends. And we actually, over time, built the business into what is today, if not the largest, then among the largest builders of advanced manufacturing plants in America. So we're very proud of that. But what I often say, Coda, is that it's not bragging about the family or the business. It's about the jobs that we've created. We've recruited lots of plants, lots of manufacturing plants, especially to Kentucky, more than 500 projects in Kentucky alone in 53 counties. And more than 20,000 people a day walk through the doors of plants built by Gray Construction. And we're very proud of that, because when I think of it, I think, like many people, that a job is precious. And you really think that when you lose a job or when you have friends or family that lose jobs. And this recession has been a real challenge for that, the recession that we've gone through. But I always say that jobs give purpose and meaning in life, and everybody in the world wants a good job. And I think your listeners probably are folks that would recognize that as they hear me talk about it. And that's why in this campaign, I often say, without any apology, that it's all about jobs, jobs, and jobs. Because at the end of the day, when folks have meaningful jobs and they have that purpose and meaning in life, then they're going to focus on what's important. They're going to focus on education for their kids. They're going to focus on what can improve the life, their own lives, and the civic life, the opportunities for folks around them, their faith life. All goes together, and it's a constructive circle of progress.
And I know when you said small family business, I'm glad that you kind of explained the meteoric rise of Gray Construction. Is that correct?
Gray Construction's the name of our family business, yep.
And I know, I'm glad you provided that statistic that I believe 20,000 Kentuckians go to work every day in factories that your construction company actually built.
Right. That's the number. We did a count on that. And a lot of those plants that we built, we also helped recruit.
Mm-hmm.
So we would help communities across the state in their economic development and industrial development efforts. And that's when I learned about the importance of jobs. I'd go to groundbreakings and I'd go to ribbon cutting ceremonies, Coda, and sometimes I went to so many of them. Politicians would go in one ear and out the other what they'd say at these events, because they'd always talk about how great it was to get these new 100 jobs, 200 jobs, sometimes 300. With Toyota, it was 8,000 new jobs. And it was almost cliche to me, but once I became mayor of Lexington, and once I had these people coming up to me often, when I would see folks and I would see the stress and the tension and the anxiety that they were having because they may have lost a job, or they were looking for jobs, good jobs, or they're looking for a better job, better paying job, that's when I really realized how important job creation is in a state. Our economy hasn't grown at the clip that it grew in the 60s, 70s, 80s, post-World War II. And that's been a real source of concern for people. And I see this economic anxiety myself across the state. I see it across the state. When we're only growing at a 1.5% GDP, or gross domestic product, when we're only growing it at 1.5%, that's not enough for the middle class to really grow and have job opportunities. And I think if there's anything that's been the backbone of America for generations, for arguably the whole history of our country, it's been a rising middle class. This belief, that we can do better than our parents. We have something to look forward to. We have opportunity to look forward to, and so it's just so essential and it's so important that we restore that sense of pride and that sense of optimism in a rising middle class. And that's why the cornerstone of my campaign is jobs, economic growth, and development. And I've got some subsets of that I can go into, but I don't want to wear you out.
No, I'm fine. I'm interested in all these things, but just for the sake of our listeners that are just wanting, to meet you, let's talk a little bit also about the transition from your successful business experience to political office. Now, you were at the head of Gray Construction in the early 2000s, and then you ran for a council at large seat and actually got the highest vote total, so you were vice mayor up until 2010, I believe.
You got your homework.
Well, I try. And then
Thank you.
And then you successfully ran for mayor of Lexington in 2000. Were recently reelected. Talk a little bit about that transition and how you applied your business experience to the mayoral position in Lexington.
Well, that's a perfect question for me because I think about it all the time. I thought when I ran for mayor, I had this aspiration that I could, and belief that I could translate good business practices and principles into government. Government and business, they're different. And when people say you can run government just like a business, well, they've really not been in government, or they've only been in business. But what I learned is that you can take good business practices and principles. When I first was elected, I faced a $30 million budget deficit that we had to fix and turned it into surpluses for 5 years. We had a $350 million underfunded pension plan for our fire and police fighters, our firefighters and our police, and we had to fix that. It was called the best, most effective pension reform in the country. And we had a health insurance plan for city employees, serving our city employees. We were budgeting $20 million and we're spending $40 million. So we had a $20 million bust there. So I was faced with these severe financial challenges right out of the gate. In terms of our health care plan, we had to reform it from top to bottom. And what we did was created our own clinic for city employees. We patterned it after a Chattanooga model. We patterned it and we created our own pharmacy. And our costs have gone from $40 million a year down to $23 million a year. But more importantly, the care is better and the employees love it. Employees love it. They're getting better health care, very predictable. You can get appointments easily, and their pharmaceutical costs are lower. So we found ways to fix the problems. And I think that's what I believe, and that's one of the reasons that I'm running for the U.S. Senate, because I believe we've had way too much gridlock in Washington. Way too much dysfunction, way too much unwillingness to work across the aisle. Democrats and Republicans work together. I often say that every Democratic idea is not a good one, and every Republican idea is not a bad one. Yeah, I'm running as a Democrat, but I've served as a nonpartisan mayor of Lexington. And so I know that you've got to work with everybody. You've got to pull everybody together around the work table to get problems solved. I think I learned that in the family business too. I learned that, you can have disagreements and arguments and real discord with your brother one day, and then that the next morning you got to get up and you got to work together again. And I think that's the way, the attitude and spirit that we ought to have in Washington today, instead of the gridlock and the fighting that goes on way too much.
Well, I know in this day and age, it seems like the voters are wanting that businessman turned politician. It seems like there's a desire for that, and you successfully pulled that off when you transitioned from Gray Construction to the mayoral office in Lexington, and now you're wanting to replicate that and be our next senator from Kentucky in the U.S. Congress. What else would you like to take to the Senate? What do you think skills and your experience that you could take that would benefit us here in Western Kentucky?
Well, I've worked all over the state. Unfortunately, Princeton's not one of the towns that we've actually built in. I know you've got some good industry here, and you've got a great agricultural base here, and you've got then a diversified economy, which really represents health. Now, things can always be better and can always be improved, and this is a reason that I've said that I would put in my offices around the state as senator. You know, the senator has the opportunity to place offices around the state, and instead of putting somebody in the office who would be promoting a presidential campaign for me, which I've said I'd never run for president, I intend to serve the citizens of Kentucky first and always. But I'd put economic development professionals in those offices so they could help to promote jobs and help economic growth and development. You know, it doesn't take a lot sometimes. I've discovered that often a town or a city just is not visible enough. People aren't aware enough of it. And once they become aware, they're more attracted to it. And so this is the approach that I would take as a senator. Now, at the national level, at the federal level, I would be an advocate for infrastructure. I'd be an advocate for roads and highways, utilities. We've today, regrettably, we're still living on our parents' and our grandparents' infrastructure. We just have not invested like other countries. We're investing 2% of our GDP in infrastructure. European countries, 5%. China, Asian countries, even more. Well, that says that you're getting behind competitively. All these things go together when you think about the economy. Our country has always built itself out of adversity. After World War I and the Great Depression, we invested. We had high debt because we'd invested in a war. We had high debt because we're struggling with the Great Depression. We invested in the country, though. We built highways. We built bridges. We built dams. We built, through the WPA, we built libraries and civic buildings all across the country. This was in the 30s, after the Great Depression. So we built ourselves out of adversity, out of difficulty. We did the same thing after World War II. That was the interstate highway system, the largest infrastructure project in the history of America. And after that, it was a space program, which led to the inventiveness and the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit that led America for the next 50 years and the world. So when you think about it, making these investments in infrastructure is just essential, just essential.
And speaking to the listeners of Caldwell County, what would you like them to know about you?
Well, I'd like for the listeners to know that I'm a seventh generation Kentuckian. I've lived here all my life. I've worked throughout our state. I've gotten to know the people of our state, and I care. You know, I think when it really boils down to it, you got to have somebody in elective office who really cares about the people, about serving the people. You know, I often say in my job as mayor, even on a bad day, it's a great job. I also go on to say that if you have a deep need to be loved, do not run for mayor. Try something else. But you got to have a spirit that says you care about people and you care about serving people. And so I like problem solving. I like seeing a problem, identifying the root cause of that problem. I learned this from Toyota, building for Toyota almost 30 years ago, building that plant. Then we adopted a lot of the Toyota production system in our company, the Toyota business practices. And they're always about trying to find the root cause of the problem and working on it, and also about continuous improvement. So I think our country ought to be thinking this way instead of being partisan bickering. We ought to be thinking, how are we going to improve our country? How are we going to deal with these problems? How are we going to deal with issues associated with infrastructure and growth and jobs? How are we going to deal with drugs? How are we going to deal with these kinds of issues that many cities and many communities, especially those where they don't have jobs? I see this in severely depressed areas of our state, especially coal communities today, where we need to diversify the economy. But we need to reach out. We need to work hard with people. We need to care about these conditions. And, I've said that a U.S. Senate seat is a terrible thing to waste. My opponent has run for the presidency almost since he took over, was sworn in as senator. That's not something I'm going to do. I'm going to care about the people of Kentucky. I'm going to care about the problems of Kentucky. I'm going to work on the problems of Kentucky.
Well, you've stated that you will be willing to work in a bipartisan fashion, and I think our listeners really appreciate that, since Washington has become known, famous even, for the gridlock. And I know you said that you were in a nonpartisan position as Lexington mayor, and you'll believe you'll be able to apply that as well in Congress?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know any other way to operate. That's the only way I think that anybody should operate. Bringing people together collaboratively, working to cooperate, working to solve problems. In that spirit of cooperation and problem solving is what we need. And I believe it can be done. John F. Kennedy said, "Every man can make a difference, and each one of us should try." And I think that's a good way to express the commitment that I have and the interest I have in serving the citizens of Kentucky.
Well, a JFK quote's always a good transition point. So you will actually be at Polly's Pizza at noon.
There we go.
Local voters will be able to come and actually speak with you if you'd like to encourage them to come out.
Absolutely.
Actually have the opportunity to meet with you. Are you going to talk or individually, or how is it going to be set up?
Well, I think I'm probably going to be, usually wherever I go, Coda, I have a chance to say something. So
it seems like U.S. Senate candidates get that opportunity a little more than the rest of us.
But I'll be shaking a few hands. I don't want to interrupt everybody that's having their lunch. So I'll be able to introduce myself. I've learned that if you go up to a table and you see that somebody's deep in conversation, try to avoid interrupting, because the last thing you want to do is get between the people and their food.
Especially talking politics.
Exactly. Right.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners this morning?
I just appreciate y'all inviting me and having me here. It's great to be here in Princeton, and that's one of the joys of the job of the running for the Senate and a statewide. It reacquaints me with so much of the state that I grew up with. Traveling around and doing projects. And as mayor of Lexington in the last few years, and as our company grew beyond the borders, I didn't have as much of a chance. Others did, but I didn't have as much of a chance to visit around the state. And so I'm having that chance again, and it's pretty exciting.
Well, we're very happy to have you here today. Once again, Tiger listeners, that was Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Mr. Jim Gray. He's the current mayor of Lexington, and he's running against incumbent Senator Rand Paul this November. Best of luck to you on the election.
Thanks, Coda. Thanks so much.
No problem. All right, Jordan, I'll let you sign off. Thanks for listening. We'll go back to regular programming. You're listening to
Whether it's today, tomorrow, next week, or next year, when you need furniture and mattresses, come on into Herb Hayes Furniture and Mattress. Hi, this is Peg, and when you come in